Welcome to On the Mark. I'm your host, Howard Mark Rubin. I am so excited to present this podcast series addressing our rapidly changing world and how it is affecting industries and people in unique and interesting ways. As John F. Kennedy once said, change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past or present are certain to miss the future. The business leaders and personalities who I will be interviewing in these podcasts certainly look to the future. And I hope you come away with information and inspiration that helps you adapt in both your business and personal lives. You can find these podcasts on all major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, getsplatzer.com. Welcome to On the Mark. This episode is very timely. We'll be talking about immigration. We'll be talking about how politics sometimes gets involved in immigration policy. And we have as our guest someone who's a leading immigration lawyer and a mayor of I believe it's Englewood, New Jersey. And so he's very qualified to talk about this issue on many levels. His name is Michael Wildes. He's the managing partner of Wildes Weinberg, as well as the mayor. So he's involved in both parts. Welcome, Michael, to On the Mark.
Pleasure, Mr. Rubin. Lovely to see you.
Please call me Howard. So Michael, please tell us a little about what you do. Tell us about your background and what you do in immigration and in politics and how you're involved.
Happy to. Actually, second generation immigration lawyer. My dad, rest his soul, started a practice in 1960 before he and my mom started me in 1964. We're actually in the same building on 53rd and Madison with offices in New Jersey as well as Miami. Visas, green cards, citizenship, that's what we do. I'm also the mayor of a small city, as you said, in Bergen County in New Jersey. I'm a fifth term mayor of Englewood, New Jersey. I teach two classes at the Benjamin N. Cardozo School of Law. I teach a class in business immigration law and a externship. And I'm an EMT with a Jewish volunteer ambulance service called Hatzalah. I have one wife, 4 kids, and thank God, Belia and Hara, 8 grandchildren. So the best title out of all the ones that I regale is actually being called a papi, not a mayor, not a professor, or a lawyer, but it's being a grandfather. And making sure we get immigration right is one of the things that will make their lives a lot easier in the future, Howard.
I think you've left out on your resume that you're also an author, a published author, and you have a book out. As your father had a book. I know he was the lawyer for John Lennon, and he's written a book on that. And you've also written a book, I believe, on immigration issues. Isn't that?
I just submitted my second manuscript for another book because it's such a timely issue. My books are good for my students, maybe, and to pass some time in the men's room. My father's book is absolutely a wonderful story. And you can say I'm a dreamer, and I'm not the only one. He represented John and Yoko in the most bitterly contested deportation proceedings of our time. And out of that case came the underpinnings of DACA. So 45 years later, President Obama would put his hat on that hook that John and Dad, a dreamer and a scholar, rolled up their sleeves and set seeds for about 1 million people here in America now that are, by the grace of God and an act of their parents, where they didn't act illegally on their own, still suspended into animation legally.
Well, I think at that time there was political issues. I think it was the Vietnam War that John Lennon and I think it was the Nixon administration were going after him or trying to deport him at the time. And it may be something similar to what's going on now. I don't want to take a political position, and it's not important to, but I do want to talk a little about the use of the Alien Enemy Act. In our history, it's only been used at time of war, I believe. And the present administration is using it as a rationale or as a basis to enforce immigration laws in a way that are very aggressive. Can you give me your opinions and what do you think is the applicability of the law and the way it's being handled right now?
Be happy to. So, these seditious acts, or these acts, were really promulgated at a time when they were fighting pirates on the high seas, or they were acts of war, and they wanted to take action against those that would be involved in espionage or want to sabotage America's interest during a war effort. They are words that are being construed quite liberally by the administration to include the war on drugs, the war on all kinds of other challenges that they have at our border. And I think that there isn't anybody within your listening audience that believes that we should allow and protect bad people, bad actors from staying here. My book was Safe Haven in America: Battles to Open the Golden Door. The notion that America has a door on a hinge that would close against those that would cause us harm. But by extrapolation, we are not in a war, and a time of war. Congress would have to formally declare war, not the president, and it is being used beyond what it was originally scoped out to use. Now, again, I believe that the president is responding to admonitions that he made while campaigning, and he'll find very soon that there aren't as many bad actors as they anticipated, and they'll probably cast the net even wider, catching more people that were not really meant to be deported. Let's pull the drone or the lens back on the landscape and understand that our founding documents and parents envisioned a world where people would be coming to America, the greatest risk takers and entrepreneurs, and we wouldn't want to turn them away. Even the president conceded we want to give green cards to students. Why should we have them come on US soil, pay tuition, and then compete against them in a different economy? We have to get this right. Immigration law is constantly evolving under economic circumstances, but now more than ever, the Trump administration's policies are testing the mettle of our constitutional character.
Well, I don't know that it's just the Trump administration. I think we've had generations and multiple presidents. None of them have been able to pass a comprehensive immigration reform bill, which everybody thinks is necessary. They may have a different viewpoint as to what that bill should look like, but no administration has been capable, in my opinion, of formulating an immigration bill. What do you think an immigration policy, as someone who's in politics as well as immigration, what do you think should be the framework of a fair immigration policy?
Well, I mean, the president is relying heavily on stopping the bleed and making sure that the borders are secure, and then dealing with the issues at a second time. But I think the notion of the word comprehensive became a dirty word in several administrations, as you artfully referred to. The border in chief was actually President Obama, who to date still has deported more people than any president in our history. Look, we have to get this right. The Trump administration has stated it will seek out and criminally target sanctuary cities and anyone who helps immigrant communities avoid ICE agents. Even in New Jersey, the newly appointed U.S. attorney specifically mentioned targeting the mayor of Paterson, New Jersey, for running a sanctuary city. This just this past week, a Milwaukee County Circuit judge was arrested and suspended from duty for allegedly misdirecting federal agents who were trying to detain a man set to appear in a courtroom on charges not related to his immigration status. It's so important that we get this right and understand while there are legitimate concerns about anti-Semitism in the campuses and all the other um, ex- uh, challenges that we have internationally. Immigration is still a tool that has distinguished us among the nations. We regularly get numbers of inquiries speaking about immigration, not only in public forums, schools, private organizations, media outlets. There's never been a time where people are more concerned about the notion of this heightened atmosphere. And as I travel to cities with large immigrant populations, and I do a lot of free immigration forums, I see people even more nervous now than ever before. The current climate has also factored into my decision to publish another book focusing on U.S. immigration and naturalization law, because it's such an important time that we not deviate from precedent and from the evolution of our policy. We have grown to understand that love can be packaged differently than it was in the olden days. And of course, knowing that hindsight is not 2020 unless you properly study the past to discern, as you said artfully in the opening jingle of your podcast, the complex causes and effects that take place. Those of us that give some time into what results and current actions may bring um, understand the effect that this could have in unprecedented times with sadly a very unpredictable president. And that's really what's happening right now here. The problem is the immigration process is very complicated, and a single mistake or inaccurate statement can entirely derail a person's circumstance and undermine an entire family or business. So what's my solution here? I actually look at this three-dimensionally. We need people to pick crops in blueberries in Georgia. We need people to make beds in hotels and to cook in restaurants. And we need to be ahead of the curve when it comes to the greatest inventions, and not just the STEM fields, but in the creative space as well. And we need to be ahead of everybody else in order to protect ourselves against those that have insidious things in mind. That's not hard in a post 9/11 world where we have the lessons of history behind us and the greatest and the wealthiest community ever when it comes to technology, AI, and so forth. It is possible to come up with the right balance. And I'm prayerful that by pushing back, whether it's in the courts or otherwise, that eventually we'll have a much better product.
Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, depending on your political bent, uh, the president's policy on immigration among the populace has not really been so negative. His very aggressive policy of using this Alien Enemy Act, if you look at a lot of the polls, is not something that Trump voters or Trump supporters are offended by. Maybe they should be offended by it. Maybe it's certainly a usurpation of the rights of Congress, and it's a usurpation of what immigration policies is. But taking people who, because they're prospective gang members, they think they're gang members, and just rounding them up, giving them no due process and kicking them out of the country, does not seem to be unpopular with the American people. And I think that that may be unfortunate, and but it seems to be the public sentiment. And if that's the public sentiment, that's only going to encourage more for the president to usurp the powers of Congress to do whatever he wants, and using the Alien Enemy Act. And my last point I want to ask you about is that this is ultimately going to go to the U.S. Supreme Court as to whether what's the powers of the presidents on immigration law. As you said before, it should be the Congress should be in charge of this. But in this Supreme Court, a very conservative Supreme Court, which normally would be very strict constructionist and look at the law, it may go his way, it may not go his way as to what's going to happen. But what's your feeling about what kind of controls can there be on the president in the present climate to just kick anyone out he wants from the country without any due process at all? Do you think the courts are set up that they could actually be a deterrent to him?
There's a very famous case. I used to review it with my dad the night before he went to class to teach it. He taught for 33 years at the Cardozo Law School. I met my wife in his class, actually, and I taught two of my four kids when they attended the Cardozo Law School. There's an undoubtedly major uptick in concern amongst not just immigrant communities, but also the response, as you artfully spoke about, to the media. President Trump's policies, rhetoric, and action since returning to the White House. This certainly extends to the crackdown on immigrants who came to America illegally or whose legal status had expired, and it's included deportations without trial under antiquated acts that have been challenged in courts, disregarding orders of federal judges around these deportations and the targeting of international students and the threat of revocation and the ability of universities to host these students, even the prospect of revoking green cards. I have to tell you that uh, this undermines the trust that the several immigrant communities have uh, in law enforcement and in reporting domestic violence crimes and so forth. Despite the highly publicized ICE raids in all these major cities, um, it has an incredibly damaging effect on people being afraid to go to work, go to school, seek medical attention, go to church, report crimes to police, and other major disruptions of their lives. Fundamentally, Howard, immigration is a shared authority between Congress and the president. That case was the Heresiades case that gave the um, plenary power to Congress when it came to making laws and the president to execute on the laws. The president is taking the position that it interferes with his ability to conduct foreign policy for anybody to tell him what he can and can't do. And they're executing on foreign policy and removing people. Now, I have no problem personally when they're going after people that would support Hamas and insidious terrorists, because I believe that is in the authority of the president. Certainly, with the dormancy of a mayor and a governor, the president, to his credit, stepped up and did something smart about it. But what I do take issue is when the president does not respect the federal judge. These checks and balances that we have are there by design. And although the appointments are made in a political um, cauldron, if you would, by one president or another, uh, justice should remain blind, and the principles and policies that guide us need to be respected by all actors. The president turning his back on the federal courts is a very dangerous constitutional crisis for our nation, in all truth, and that is the order of the day, and that is going to be the biggest challenge. I don't know what's going to go to the Supreme Court and not, Howard. The president is trying to undermine things like birthright citizenship. You're born in America, that is in the Constitution, it's the 14th Amendment, and he's trying to suspend it. I don't think that will even get to the Supreme Court. That's such settled law, as it were. But I think the president has to understand that he works in tandem with Congress in this space, and you can't act unilaterally.
Michael, I think you underestimate the Supreme Court's ability to use existing laws and to say they stay into effect. Abortion is an example of that they overturned abortion, even though it says in the Constitution that it says birthright citizenship. There's certainly a reference in there. Do you think it's impossible that the Supreme Court could overturn the right to birthright citizenship?
No,
And
no, not at all. Not at all. It's not open to interpretation. The wording that's, if at all, questionable has to do with diplomats. We've had some major clients, by the way, whose children were born in America to diplomats, and they are not subject to the jurisdiction and hence not citizens. That was the intentionality of Congress, and it's in the expressed wording of the Constitution. It would take an amendment to the United States Constitution, which would require an overwhelming amount of both houses of Congress and all the state legislatures throughout the nation in order to change that. We are a country of jus locale, where you are born out of and given statutory rights out of where you're born, as opposed to jus sanguine, which is more European, based on your blood. I remember my grandfather uh, admonishing my father, rest their souls, to go vote. And my father said, "What's the difference if I vote or not, Dad?" He had like 15 minutes to get over to the poll. And my Zadie, my grandfather, turned to my father and said, "That's because you're a citizen by chance. I'm a citizen by choice." I came to this country. You have to go vote, even, and it's not a fait accompli, and you have to be part of the process. I think it's such an important thing for us to understand the gift that we have of being born in this nation, and that we need to preserve that system for the next generation. We had a case, Howard, once where a baby was born on an airplane over US airspace. The baby became a citizen. It was on an American flag plane over US airspace. When they landed, the mother had to leave within 90 days under her governing visa document. Until the child would turn 21, the child could not sponsor the parent. So the laws are designed to protect certain things. There aren't anchor babies. Nobody's crossing the Rio Grande so that 21 years later, the baby that they're bearing will be able to sponsor them. They're put in by design to make sure that we set up a fair system. I think one of the things, if I had my druthers, would be to do what President Reagan did. To his credit, in 1986, he basically took all the gals and guys in with badges and guns and put them into the enforcement mode to punish employers. But he said, we're going to punish America's employers for not doing a good immigration job, but we're going to take care of the people that are here. You see, in those days, Howard, there were 3 million people unlawfully present in America. And the president said, let's give them all green cards. We can't have them live in shadows. They didn't trust the president. They had to open up offices on 24th Street in the west side of Manhattan because they thought it was a ruse if you went into the federal building to get your work authorization. But this president, a Republican, had the audacity to just give them green cards because you don't treat people like this. We want them to pledge their allegiance to our flag and to have that work for us. There are 30 million people here unlawfully now. If this president believes that he's going to deport 1,500 a day, he'll maybe hit 2.5 million, still less than President Obama, and not enough to make a dent in a $30 million corridor. So I don't think there are enough airplanes, beds, handcuffs, FedEx trucks to remove the people that they're trying to do. And I think the president and his supporters know this. So the question is, what do you do? How do we do this? Do we bring people into the system, get tax dollars, and say this generation will not vote for the next 10 years? So we take the political venom out of the argument, perhaps. Do we use the exemplar of President Reagan? Well, that is still the law of the land. You know, Howard, now employers can be punished for not policing the immigration of their own staff and employees. We shifted the responsibility, but that was a different economy in 1986. We're now punishing America's employers for not doing the job that the government can't do on immigration. We didn't learn the lessons of some of the of history and the changes in our economy. And this president has, in many ways, inherited a broken system, and it's really up to Congress to fix it. Shame on both houses, that is, both Democrats and Republicans, for being given the opportunity and then squandering it. In many
Yeah.
ways, it's a visual they can't overcome, where they feel that they look weak on Homeland Security if they're smart on immigration policy. And if they have to get elected every 2 years, they can't competently explain this to their constituents. We're bound to just keep kicking the can down the aisle.
It seems to me that the Dreamer legislation that's been in Congress during Democratic and Republican administrations, where the Democrats had the majority and the Republicans, and everyone agrees that there should be some policy. Why do you think it is that that legislation to deal with the Dreamer issue, which is what you've been talking about, the people that are here illegally, but they've been here so long and they should have a path to legal status. Why do you think it's so impossible to deal with this issue politically and come to a resolution for generations, and it's Democrats and Republicans?
So that's again the space that I alluded to earlier, where you can say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. That famous clause from
Right.
Imagine song. These are students, kids, judges, lawyers, police officers that came into America when they were kids by no act of their own by their parents, and they were suspended into animation. because they didn't have the mens rea, the evil intent to break laws, and they don't have accents or any countries to go back to, nor the inclination to leave. And these individuals are insulated from removal and have not advanced to the golden grail of getting a green card or citizenship. And they're suspended into animation. This status evolved out of the John Lennon case, where my dad had been the lawyer of record, and is still there. The whole notion of prosecutorial discretion has suspended these 1 million plus people into animation. And if they can't fix this as a no brainer, how are they supposed to fix the other 29 million people that are here illegally? And that's what happens when you leave something festering where something can go from bad to worse. And in many ways, that's why there's a clarion interest in the way my dad handled that case. You see, at the time, and you said it, they reduced the election from 25 down to 18 in the 70s, and it was John Lennon that controlled the narrative at the time of teenagers that were against peaceniks, that were against the Vietnam War. And President Nixon at the time felt he could avoid a lot of headaches if he got Lennon deported, and because there was no Google in those days, and Lennon controlled the narrative for those 3 million new voters that were going to come on. Until they met my father, who had no idea who the hell John Lennon was, and proved that the drug conviction that John had, that they were trying to deport him, was not a problem. Eventually suing the government under the Freedom of Information Act, knowing that there was a program to look the other way, and having what my father used this word, pure jubilation. I never knew what jubilation meant until my dad spoke so artfully about that time, when there are 1,843 cases that came to the office, cases of burglars and robbers and muggers and all kinds of criminals that we looked at the other way because of a greater good, adverse history to, or adverse media effect to immigration, or a greater good in keeping people together and family reunification and so forth. So this program is still there. There are many people that are able to get out of the DACA program into the mainstream, get green cards and citizenship through some good lawyering. But it's again symptomatic of a system that does not appear to understand shades of gray. We're no longer black and white in this country. People who come to the United States intending to leave then have circumstances that prevent them from leaving, whether it's political unrest, tsunamis, or earthquakes. And we have to be out of the box and figure out ways to manage the expense and to invest in these individuals.
Touch on something else that also is in the intersection of politics and immigration. Now, both you and I are strong supporters of Israel, and we've always been. And I'm kind of torn between what's happening on the college campuses, which is disgusting, and the anti-Semitism that's been expressed. But then the government is using um, immigration laws to take people who are here illegally with green cards and to expel them from the country. Now, I have no love for anyone who supports anything close to Hamas, whether Hamas or any kind of anti-Semitic bent. But I do have I am a little torn that they're using the immigration laws for people who are here with green cards and to deport them out of the country without really due process. I mean, they sent some to Louisiana because they didn't want the courts in New York to have to deal with it. Could you give me, as someone who I know is a strong supporter of Israel, but also supports due process and civil rights for people, what's your take on all that?
It's such a delicate balance. The federal government, Howard, has targeted Harvard with a number of measures in an attempt to exert control over the administration and the influence of policies, DEI, as well as foreign students and faculty. One of the measures had to do with canceling the SEVP, which allows Harvard to enroll certain classes of of foreign students. Others included the revocation of $2.7 million in federal grants for violence prevention and public health studies and programs. DHS is demanding a number of reports from Harvard on various programs and policies, and records on student visas. DHS is demanding that an external party be approved by DHS to conduct audits and oversight over areas including admissions, hiring, discipline, whistleblowers, and so forth. These viewpoint diversities and is counterintuitive to an anti-DEI policy. We have to assume it means allowing DHS to require its own chosen viewpoints and inserting that into every department that it wants to. Look, there are legitimate concerns about anti-Semitism, and I believe fundamentally my daughter went to Columbia undergrad into the School of Journalism in the master's, and another daughter went to Barnard. It offends me that any Jew would sit in fear of going to class, that their Magen David, that their Star of David would be ripped off, and the kind of violence that portends itself. But I also have to understand and believe that the potential, this notion of anti-DEI requirements and the imposition of the government's viewpoints clearly indicates that they're using the foreign students as part of a larger feud that the federal government has with Harvard. And if they don't line up with the Trump policies and demands, they're going to end up losing their tax exempt status. And there is precedent for the IRS revoking a tax exempt status on social grounds. In 1983, Bob Jones University lost its status because it banned interracial relationships among students. It didn't drop that policy in 2000 and only regained tax exempt status in 2017. So we have to understand and go beyond our personal interests, whether it's one politic or another, to understand the intrusion that government is making into private affairs. And I will be the first one to thank the president for stepping up and fighting anti-Semitism, but I'll also be the first one to acknowledge that Harvard has its right to govern itself free of any intrusion by the United States government as well. That balance is what we as lawyers need to protect. I have to tell you that I'm a talking head in a lot of media outlets on what's happening, and I do believe, again, that the president stepped up nobly, where the mayor and the governor of New York did nothing to protect Jews that were being discriminated against. And it's utterly impossible for me to understand how they have professional rabble risers on campuses trying to convince people that this is free speech. This is illicit conduct. We learned in college, forget law school, of the Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire, the fighting words doctrine. You're not allowed to go into a movie theater and scream fire. You have no absolute right to speech. You have every right to express yourself. But when your conduct becomes one that will cause harm to another, you've crossed the line. So it's very easy for the administration, I believe, to start removal proceedings against somebody, even if they have a green card, if they cross that line from speech to conduct. We just can't let them draw that line where the government wants to draw it. It has to be drawn by the courts, and it has to be clear. Now, I have to tell you, one of the most uncomfortable things of being an elected official, but it's one of the most noblest of things, is that free moments at the end of every meeting where any citizen gets to go up to a microphone and talk for 3 minutes unscathed. And we have rabid anti-Semites that come up into my face with venom, put all kinds of tropes and terrible epithets and thoughts about Jews and others. And I have to listen, and I have to take it as part of the noble tradition of giving people the right to express themselves. But I have no patience whatsoever if they're going to burn a flag, if they're going to incite violence or intimidate or assault somebody. That is where we have to draw the line, not just as a nation, but as true patriots of democracy.
It's a difficult thing to look at as lawyers, because we're both lawyers, to look at the enforcement of the law, but then look at everyone has their personal opinions, everyone has their biases, and in our case, the majority of the people seem to be supportive of the president's policies in this area. But one thing that I find interesting, and I guess it is within the president's or the executive's authority, is how he gives priority to certain classes of people to come into the United States. In other words, we've always had the visas if someone invested so much. Now we have golden visas for people who invest, I think, even more. We have certain. I read. Tell me if this is true, but I read that he gave Afrikaners, white South Africans, priority as being a group uh, that's been persecuted and given them priority to come into the United States. It seems to me in our immigration policy, as someone who's not, I'm certainly not left wing at all, but there seems to be very clear racism in our immigration policy as it's being done, and also we're discriminating against people who don't have a lot of wealth. It seems to be used in that way. It's not People are not equal under the law when it comes to immigration. How do you feel about that?
I mean, it's part of the culture of immigration law, and I want to just also have everybody listening to this appreciate the mechanics here. The right to counsel does not attach when you come into an airport. You have not been formally admitted to America. You don't have the right to a lawyer. You don't have the right to a lawyer at an American embassy or a consulate abroad. How many times have I been flown to Europe to stand outside and hold somebody's dog on a leash while they go in giving up their green card or getting something, and they have to come outside to talk to me because the right to counsel is just something we're going to give lovingly in America, but not in American posts abroad. It's a remarkable thing to see the prejudice that you alluded to in the Immigration Act itself. Canadians can effect a TN trade NAFTA visa at a border. They can go like a gentleman or gentle lady if they're coming into America, speak to a CBP or an immigration official and get themselves a visa sorted in the airport. A Mexican can only get a trade NAFTA visa by going to an American post. We have visa reciprocity rules that will make you cringe. The way they treat Brazilians and Nigerians and people coming from the Russian Soviet bloc and so forth pales in contrast to the way we treat Europeans and people from other countries. The notion, and you'll forgive my language, of a shithole country, which was articulated honestly by President Trump in his last administration, is the way people treat others at posts throughout the world. And it's that sense of propriety that we have to push against. There is no review of a consul that makes a visa denial overseas. There is no federal court review. They are absolute czars. My dad wrote an article, rest his soul, when he first came out of law school in 1962 on the subject. Excuse me, in 1958, the absolute czar. And later in life, the law hasn't changed. So, what do we do about this system? How do we inculcate rules of engagement that are fair or some sense of diplomacy so that we treat people artfully? Well, we're very smart sometimes about encouraging clients to become dual nationals of other countries, particularly when it comes to investor visas and other things. And we try to get people to cede themselves to other jurisdictions procedurally, where substantively we know they're going to be going up a hard wall. It's very disheartening to see a country that prides itself on equality before the law treat foreign nationals because they have accents with disdain and disrespect because of prejudice that has developed. And don't kid yourself, immigration lawyers themselves have to deal with this prejudice and make sure that we police it within ourselves too, and the cultural differences that come out in dealing with residents of different countries and so forth. That's the challenge that we have to make things more professional. and to make sure that people who go into the foreign service actually respect people that they disagree with or the politics. They're very dangerous parts of the world, and we need to be cautious, but we don't need to be disrespectful. And my parents brought me up to respect people that I disagree with, even if I don't agree with them.
Michael, I think we live in a world right now that the importance of immigration lawyers and the challenges to immigration lawyers are greater than ever before. I don't recall a time in my lifetime that the challenges to the laws faced by immigration lawyers are as great, the constitutional challenges. It's an immigration lawyer is not some guy filing paperwork. It's
Yeah.
now fighting for institutional and constitutional rights, or rights that may not be guaranteed by the Constitution, but they do have some rights. So our time is kind of up. I want to give you a last word to give people advice as to where things should be going. And I want to tell people if they have immigration issues, Michael is one of the most prominent immigration lawyers, as well as a mayor, but he's a prominent immigration lawyer, and is someone that you should consider if you have any immigration issues. He's out there, and can certainly help you. But Michael, you have
Thank
any last words you want to give?
Yeah, I was raised in a household where clients were extended family members. So my cell phone is printed on my business card, and I'm always available for those extended family members. A file was never a piece of paper, it was a journey, it was somebody's life. And it's still such a noble way to make a living and for us to engage in so many different parts of the world, helping people come to America. The whole notion that America would have a um, melting pot works so beautifully. I have the privilege, actually, of being Mrs. Trump's immigration lawyer. I acted on behalf of the president when he owned Miss Universe and Trump Models and a lot of other people. I got Mrs. Trump's parents, their citizenship, her sister, a green card. The president was pushing against people talking about chain migration, giving a visual of people coming through the jungle with monkeys and tails connected with one another. 30 people are going to come from one person, scaring people. No, it's a bedrock of immigration called family unification. That whole notion that people are going to work harder, love more. Even our first lady, I argued, was entitled to babysitting services of her parents, knowing that they were citizens of this country, so she can do the work for our nation. And that bedrock of immigration policy and trying to find ways to make this country legitimately stronger is the best tool in our box that we have to ensure that America has a future. It is still the greatest hospitality, Howard, to us as Jews and to all sorts of other nationalities, religions, and faiths throughout the world. And it's our job to take this diamond in the rough and to continually shine it and to make sure that despite its challenges, that we come up even stronger. To the Trump administration, we know that they're going to bring it on. We have to be two steps ahead and ready to go. And the theater that we're going to see people doing this is going to be in the courts. Again, this beautiful system of checks and balances was designed just for these circumstances where somebody may want to push a little too far. I don't think the president is a bigot. I think that he has appointed some people that may have that tendency, and it's up to us, that is, the lawyers in the field, to make sure that we get things within the lines. To those of you watching this that are trying to get a sense of how to navigate your own waters, my father was president of the Immigration Lawyers Association in 1970 when there were 300 or 400 lawyers. There are now about 18,000. Choose wisely and act nobly to make sure that you make this country your home and that you do it proudly. For those foreign students watching this, you are part of our future, despite the odds and the accent and the adversity and getting used to the culture of our nation. We need you more than anything now to make sure that you dig in deep, and this country will be stronger for all of this. Howard, thank you
Oh,
for
thank
hosting
you.
me.
Thank,
Look forward to
thank you,
doing it.
Michael. Thank you, Michael. I think that It's been a fascinating episode, and I think you've given people a lot of good advice. It's a great conversation. So thank you for being on the mark, and good luck in your future endeavors. We need lawyers like you.
Thank you much. Ciao.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of On the Mark. I started this podcast by quoting John F. Kennedy and would like to end it with quoting one of my favorite baseball players, Nolan Ryan. Enjoying success requires the ability to adapt. Only by being open to change will you have a true opportunity to get the most from your talent. I wish you success in staying ahead of the curve instead of behind the 8 ball. Thank you for tuning in.